emulates the example of Jesus has to be humble and modest.
The Bad Valley will make a short presentation, and after his presentation you'll be able to ask questions. The topic is the Armenian Evangelical movement, Bad Valley, Terian.
Thank you for the opportunity. I was asked to share with you some information. This is not working. If I get it closer, then
Would you like to use the podium, Bad Valley? Would you like to use the podium and fix the microphone on the podium?
Yeah, why don't you, Bad Valley? Get on the podium. We can hear you better that way. There you go. Okay, now it's ready. Okay. Is it good now? All right. Well, if we look at all the facets of history, we can trace the origination of the Armenian Evangelical movement back to the European Renaissance. In the 18th century, Armenians who lived under Ottoman rule sent their sons to European universities to get their education there. The Armenians always put a high premium on education. And scores of, hundreds I would say, of young Armenians went to Europe and started studying at various universities. And those who studied at French and German and Italian universities were imbued with the spirit of the Renaissance. They were taught about the dignity of the human being and that they should not be subservient to the Turks. And they were encouraged to think independently, to research every subject, to question everything, not accept things at face value, but try to question and understand the reason behind everything. And so these young people, after being educated in Europe, returned to their homeland, Western Armenia. 3 of them were hired by the Armenian Patriarchate of Constantinople as teachers at the seminary. One of them was Professor Grigor Peshtimaljan. The other one was Professor Apisohom Yutugyan. And the third one was Dr. Hovannes Dersahagyan. These were hired by the Armenian Patriarchate to teach seminary students, students who were preparing for the priesthood. These professors, they found that when they were in Europe, the Germans, the French, the Italians could read the New Testament in a language which they could understand. Whereas in Western Armenia, the Armenians who went to church had to listen to the Gospels being read in Kurapar, which they did not understand. They spoke Ashkarapar, didn't know Kurapar. And there was no Ashkarapar New Testament. So these 3 professors, with their students, embarked on the task of translating the New Testament. They started with the 4 Gospels and then went to the epistles. They translated the whole New Testament from Kurapar, classical Armenian, into Ashkarapar, which was the modern Armenian. And they approached the patriarch and they asked that he fund the project, that he approved the project and fund it. Their aim was to publish the entire New Testament in Ashkarapar, in the language which the Armenians spoke and knew, and then distribute these Bibles, these New Testaments, among the Armenian population, so that they could get better acquainted with the teachings of Jesus and his apostles. And they thought that knowing the Bible, knowing the contents of the New Testament, would make them not only better Christians, but also help them endure the suffering to which they were subjected by the Ottoman rulers. To their amazement, the patriarch said no. Actually, the patriarch was in favor. The patriarch was Stepan Avni. He was the patriarch of the time. They approached him and they told him about their project, and he told them he was in favor of their project, but he did not exercise his authority because the Amiras were opposed. The Amiras were wealthy Armenians who lived in Constantinople. They had amassed their wealth either by being successful as merchants or because they had high positions in the Ottoman government. So these wealthy Armenians were called Amiras, Amira, and they lived in Constantinople. They were very influential because of their wealth. They controlled the church. So the patriarch and the church were controlled by the Amiras. The patriarch was sympathetic with the reformers and was approved their project, but he did not exercise his authority because the Amiras were opposed, and they were the ones who controlled the church. So he did nothing about it. He was succeeded by Archbishop Hagopos Seropian, and he also straddled the fence. He told the reformers that he sympathized with them and he thought their project was worthwhile, but then he told them that since the Amiras opposed it, it couldn't be implemented. So they told him, forget about it. It's amazing that his brother, the brother of Archbishop Hagopos Seropian, was Stepan Seropian, and he was a member of the Society of the Pious. These three professors, together with their students and three priests, formed a society called the Society of the Pious. They met at regular intervals and studied the New Testament. Each day they would study a chapter from the Gospels and then a chapter from the epistles written by the apostles, and they would try to find out what Jesus and the apostles said to the people who lived in those days. So they had a Bible study, kind of a Bible study group. These reformers presented two projects to the patriarchs of their day. One was that the New Testament be translated into Ashkarapar and distributed to the Armenians. Number two, that Sunday schools be established, that every Armenian church should have a Sunday school next to it where the Bible, where the New Testament, the Gospels and the epistles are taught to the members of the congregation. These were their two demands.
What was the threat? What was wrong with teaching the people the new Bible?
There was...
So what were the rich people afraid of?
There was no threat, but it looks like the Amiras thought that if the reformers had their way, they might wrest control of the church from their hands. So in 1844, Matthios Chuajian became Patriarch of Constantinople. And he had to deal with the reformers. The Society of the Pious, as I said, consisted of these three professors who were teachers at the seminary, and there were three priests, Der Vartanes Yeznagian, Der Haruchun Baldasarian, and Der Kevor Kevorkian. These priests were also members of the Society of the Pious, and they were in favor of having the Gospels and the Epistles translated into Ashtarapar, and that Sunday schools be established at every Armenian church, because they found that most people were ignorant of the New Testament. They didn't know what the New Testament taught. So they wanted to increase the biblical knowledge of the people, which was a good thing. Now, Matthios Chuajian was elected Patriarch in 1844, didn't like the Society of the Pious, didn't like the Armenian reformers, and it was his aim to crush them. First, he resorted to soft tactics. He visited the seminary and told these professors that he would increase their salaries if they forgot about the reform movement. They told them to put an end to the Society of the Pious, put an end to the Bible studies, forget about their projects, and he said if they did, he would raise their salaries. And they told him they were not interested in money. Their concern was for the spiritual welfare of their compatriots, and they wanted to make sure that their fellow Armenians knew what Jesus taught, what was required of them as Christians, and they wanted every Armenian to die a saved man and inherit the kingdom of God, have eternal life at the end. So when he found that he couldn't bribe them, he thought of organizing public debates. He was kind of sure that during these public debates, the reformers would find out that they didn't have grassroots support from the local communities, and that they would be persuaded to forget about their projects, their reforms. So there were public debates, and these public debates were quite interesting. Representing the Patriarch was Hovannes Deroyan Chamurjan. He was also a teacher at the seminary. And representing the reformers was Professor Apisovom Yutujian. And they would debate. These debates were announced ahead of time, and the subject was chosen by the Patriarch. Like the subject of the first debate was who had the highest authority. The Patriarch's representative, Hovannes Chamurjan, argued that the Patriarch had the highest authority. And the reformers, represented by Yutujian, argued that Jesus Christ is the head of the church and he has the highest authority. That the highest authority in the church is Jesus, and next to Jesus, the highest authority is the Avedaran, the gospel. So, after 7 debates, the Patriarch discovered that the reformers were not losing ground. In fact, they were gaining more sympathy and more supporters. So he put an end to the debates. And on July 1, 1846, July 21, 1846, he published an encyclical denouncing the reformers as heretics. And he removed all those parish priests who were members of the Society of the Pious or were sympathetic to the cause of the reformers. So he pronounced an anathema over them. He declared them heretics and told all Armenians not to associate with them. And then he excommunicated them. He disfellowshipped them from the church. He threw them out. He said, "You're no longer members of the Armenian Apostolic Church." This happened on June 21, 1846. Now, In the Ottoman Empire, non-Muslim communities were called millet. And according to the Ottoman system, every millet was represented by its religious head. The Patriarch Matyos Choajian told the reformers that he would no longer represent them. And so they had no representation at the Ottoman government. If they needed a marriage certificate or a birth certificate or a business permit, they had to go to the Patriarch, and the Patriarch refused to serve them. So they were left in a great predicament. So they decided to ask the Ottoman government to recognize them as a millet, separate millet. And in November 27, 1850, Sultan Abdul Majid recognized the Armenian Evangelicals as a separate millet, and he called them Protestant Mellati. So the name Protestant came from there. The Turkish Sultan called the Armenian Evangelicals Protestants, but they did not call themselves Protestants. When they were excommunicated from the Armenian Apostolic Church, these people, the members of the Society of the Pious, which numbered about 500 people, on July 1, 1846, they made a public declaration. They said, our aim was not to start a new church. Our aim was to reform the Armenian Apostolic Church, which we consider to be as our mother church. We were born in the Armenian Apostolic Church. The Armenian Apostolic Church is our mother church. We love the Armenian Apostolic Church, and our aim is just to reform the church, not to destroy it, and not to start a separate church. We did not leave the church left us. And so they declared themselves Hayastanites Avedranagam Yegerezi, which means the Armenian Evangelical, or the Evangelical Church of Armenia. And they said, we're not Presbyterian, we're not Lutheran, we're not Methodist, we are Armenian Evangelicals. When they applied to the Sultan to be recognized as a separate millet, the Sultan said, who are you? And Stepan Seropian, who was the brother of Archbishop Seropian, who later became Patriarch, he said, by nationality we're Armenians, by religion we're Christian, by confession we are Evangelical. And Stepan Seropian was chosen to be the first Askabet, the first community leader for the Armenian Evangelicals. And it's really interesting that the first Askabet of the Armenian Evangelicals was the brother of a former Patriarch of Constantinople. Two brothers on different sides of the fence. Now, since the hierarchy of the Armenian Apostolic Church shunned the evangelicals, excommunicate them, threw them out of the church, they felt that they were left like orphans. However, at that time, American Protestant missionaries started working in Turkey. And these Protestant missionaries, they found that the Armenian evangelicals were very close to them in their thinking. As I said, the Armenian evangelicals presented two reforms originally. One was the translation of the New Testament into Ashkarapar, and then the establishment of Sunday schools. And the missionaries, of course, they were interested in in having the Bible distributed among the people, local people. So the missionaries told these people, look, the Armenian Patriarchate refused to fund the printing of the Armenian Bible in the vernacular, we will fund it. So the Armenian missionaries supplied the funds for the publication of the Armenian Bible in Ashkharabad. And little by little, closer ties were forged. The missionaries started establishing colleges. And the Armenian Evangelicals encouraged education. One of the things that I have to say, to the credit of the Armenian Evangelicals, they realized the importance of educating Armenian women and girls. So the Armenian Evangelicals established colleges for girls. One of them was in Marash, the Armenian Evangelical College for Girls. Before that, the Armenians who lived in the provinces and in Cilicia, they did not educate their girls. They educated their sons, but they did not educate their girls. The Armenian Evangelicals said, we have to educate our women and our girls because we want the other half of our nation to be as productive as the male part. So the Armenian Evangelicals promoted this, and they received a lot of flack for it. Many people started criticizing the Armenian Evangelicals, saying that by educating the women, the rate of divorce would go up. By educating women, immorality might spread. But none of that was true, of course. Today, of course, everybody agrees that was the right thing to do. Educating young girls and women was the right thing to do. But there was, at that time, there was a group of people who criticized whatever the Armenian Evangelicals did was criticized. So the first church, the first Armenian Evangelical church was established in Istanbul at Pera on July 1, 1846. And in 1850 there was another church established at Gedik Pasha. Both of these churches still exist. And I've been told that at the Gedik Pasha church, every Sunday there's a service in Turkish, and then there's a service in Armenian. And I've been told that most of the Armenians who attend are migrant workers from Armenia. So Armenians in search of jobs are leaving Armenia and traveling to Turkey, working in Istanbul, finding jobs in Istanbul, jobs that they couldn't find in their homeland. And then on Sundays they go to the Armenian Evangelical Church at Gedik Pasha. Well, it's good to know that these two churches still exist and they continue their mission. And there are now Christian Turks. There are Christian Turks. We had here Reverend Grigor Baloglu a year ago. He's the Armenian Evangelical pastor in Istanbul. And he told us that there are now more than a dozen Turkish Christian congregations, and there are 3 in Ankara. He said 10 years ago there were none, or well, there was one or two. Now there are more Turks who are turning to Christianity and are being Christianized, and there are now Turkish congregations that are springing up in Ankara and Istanbul. That's good to hear. Well, in eastern Armenia, in 1820, a similar thing happened. There was a Persian Armenian by the name of Haruchun Kalustian. He was fighting with the Russian army against the Persians during the Persian-Russian War in 1805, and he fell into the hands of the Persians. And the Persian general introduced him to the Shah. He said, look, we got this prisoner of war, he's Armenian. He was fighting with the Russians, but he's an Armenian. and he is a clever man. He's the most clever man the general said I have ever met. And the Shah was impressed by this young man, so he adopted him. And he was educated at the Persian court. He learned Persian, Turkish, Arabic, and was taught the Islamic religion. His name was changed to Mirza Farrokh, which is a Persian name. Harutyun Kalustyan became Mirza Farrokh. But in 1826, this guy fled Persia, went to Armenia, searching for his family. In Armenia, he met Ghazar Bartabed, who told him that he and 3 of his students, Zohrab, Sarkisyan, Mardiros, Dararian, and Sarkis Hambartsumian, had translated the Bible from Kurapar into Eastern Armenian. But they needed funds to publish this, and they had no money. And this fellow, Persian Armenian, Harutyun Kalustyan, who used to be called Mirza Farrokh, told them that he had lots of golden coins, which he had brought with him from Persian court. So he had enough money to publish the Bible in Eastern Armenian. And so the Bible was translated into Eastern Armenian, and then Bible study groups sprang up everywhere. There were Armenian Evangelical groups at Shamah, Alexandropol, Arakala, Gars, and Tiflis, because of the work of Ghazar Bartabed and his seminary students, and thanks to this Persian Armenian, this Armenian who came from Persia loaded with gold coins. It's amazing that this happened at the same time the reform movement was going on in Western Armenia. But in 1858, Matyos Tuarjan was elected Catholicos of all Armenians, and he excommunicated the Armenian Evangelicals who lived in Eastern Armenia and in Tiflis, Georgia. Now, when we look at those events, we find that Matyos Tuarjan was short-sighted. He was really short-sighted. What he did was wrong. He should have embraced the reformers, and the Armenian church would have been stronger and richer today. When I look at the Armenian church today, I find, well, they embraced the projects that these early reformers came up with. The Armenian Bible is now in Ashkarapar and is distributed everywhere. Armenian Apostolic churches have established Sunday schools. Their Sunday schools, I mean, every single Armenian church, whether Apostolic or Catholic, has a Sunday school today. They operate Sunday schools today. So what they refused to do in 1844, today is an accomplished fact.